Kick off, ladies, Cristina,
Yes.
Albania.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here today. Well, today we are going to have this amazing session with Federico Baptista. He's going to be our speaker today, and today we're going to talk or like have this session about the minute workshop. Okay, because well, we need to understand how to make properly a minute. So I hope you guys enjoy this workshop, okay? And well, I'm going also to record this session. So Federico, whenever you're ready, you can start. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. Hi, everyone. For those who don't know me, I'm Federico Batista. I'm currently the country manager over at Fiji. Right. Over in Fiji, yes. And while some of you, oh my God. And some of you might already know me, as I used to be like the regional manager for the Caribbean, and I've also worked in Panama. So some of you already know me. So the idea, like just mentioned, is to give you guidelines a little bit, everyone, so that you could not just improve, but a little bit like make more standard, comply more to the standard model, the minutes of the company, right? Because a little bit of the observation is that everybody, even though they fill out the proper form and everything, they don't necessarily have the same way of, let's say, we don't all have the same way of writing. And so they've asked me to go ahead and do this so that to guide everybody into sort of the same style of minute making, right? And improve wherever they need to improve. So what's the importance of minutes, right? The importance of minutes is that they basically communicate the topics of a meeting, right? And the important thing, which is obvious and simple, but the thing is that you have to bear in mind that meetings are always called for specific reasons, right? This is where we exchange information, we set up goals, we make decisions, and provide guidelines. Mostly, for example, when you have meetings with somebody, let's say from the board or somebody from executive position, obviously, most of the things is at the end of the day, you're going to look for some guidelines, right? So the idea is that the importance of the minute is that the minute acts as a registry and has to reflect what was shown or what was discussed, right? But it needs to be long enough to cover the issues, but but short enough to keep everybody interested, right? And so act legal documents sometimes in some places. In our case, it's not going to act like that, but we'll get into our structure. But just so you better keep in mind that minutes are so important. In certain cases, it even acts like a legal document, and it has to reflect all the topics discussed in a clear, consistent, and sharp manner. So just to give you like a brief idea of what happens when we don't keep our minutes sharp enough, or what happens, the idea behind a minute, because the people who read it normally are not there. So as you can see, you can start with an idea and maybe it resolves a topic, but at the end of the day, you end up with a different concept if you don't know how to properly communicate the matters of that were discussed or the topics in the meeting, and therefore the person can get a whole different picture of what they have to do versus what it is exactly that was communicated. So the role of a minute writer basically is to take notes of the relevant aspects that are discussed in the agenda, but they need to also make sure and have the capacity to discern which topics are not important, meaning you have to get rid of those irrelevant subjects and you have to highlight all the agreements made, but not everything that was said. So minutes are not a word-by-word document. Minutes are a short summary of basically what was discussed and what the actions are and who's responsible, and also reflect what commitments were made and who is responsible for those commitments. Also, one thing that's important to reflect in minutes, and sometimes you're going to have to do that even though it's not clearly discussed, but also assign deadlines to any point of action or any agreement made. So just for a little quick, let's say, picker-upper for the end of the afternoon, can anybody in the chat, you can write, can anybody tell me who those three people in the bottom of the slide are?
Yeah, I have no idea.
Oh, Charisse, can you hear now? Because I see you wrote that you couldn't hear. Oh, I can hear now. All right, cool. No worries. Well, those people at the bottom are three famous, let's say, Nobel Prize winner writers. Two of them are Caribbean, one of them is not. From left to right, the first one is Derek Walcott. He's from Barbados. I believe he's the first Caribbean, fully Caribbean person that
Derek Walcott is from St. Lucia, I think.
Oh,
Not
sorry,
Barbados.
St. Lucia. You're right.
Thank you.
Well done, Shelley. Then you have Toni Morrison, who I believe is Jamaican American. And then you have T.S. Eliot. So let's talk about a little bit the structure of the minute, or the structure of a Weckeninter minute, right? It normally has, let's say, 3-4 sections, well, 4 or 5, so anyways, has different sections, but the one that's more important is the one where you're gonna have to obviously narrate everything that's going on. So first things that these minutes have to cover is who the participants are, who are the people attending, and what their position is. At the end of the minute of the presentation, I will show you an example of a minute. And, oh, somebody wrote here. Isabel moves, can't hear. I'm trying to fix my end. Yeah, sorry, I don't know what to do. Anyways, so have you tried, Isabel, have you tried? Well, she can't hear me, so, and I don't know if Pumeya can help her, or Cristina, so I can move forward. And there we go. So first is participants, right? Who was there and what their positions are. It's obviously important to show that, because to know who were the persons involved, who made decisions, and who was going to be responsible for those actions, which is mentioned further ahead, depends a lot, or it's good to have that cleared from the beginning, who's there, right? Also, a proposed agenda. The idea of the proposed agenda is that you obviously put the items discussed or that are going to be discussed, but also keep it short, meaning, because I've seen minutes where the title of the agenda point proposed is very long. The idea is that you have like a maximum of 5 words that briefly give an idea of what exactly you're going to talk about, or what has been obviously what was spoken about. Content, obviously, this is the part where most of the problems arise, because this is the part where you get a lot of free text, and therefore this is where you have to cover the situation that's going on, what the impact of the situation is, what are the steps or actions that have to be taken, and sort of what the conclusion of that discussion point was. And you also have to, ideally within the content, at the end of the minute, there's a little bit of a, like, let's say like a table where you basically mention what the actions are, what the consequences of the items, what are they going to produce, let's say, and then you close with the agreements and commitments, right? So let's see. So just to give you an example, common mistakes in minutes, right? Which are the things that basically, whenever we try to, ideally, when we make a minute, the idea is to get a sharp, clear image of what exactly was it that we did. And you can start with somebody something like this and then end up with something like this if you don't do your minutes right. So the idea is to make sure that this doesn't happen.
Rico,
Hey,
just 1
Federico.
second, I'm not seeing the screen.
Yes.
Who else is not seeing the screen?
I think you stopped sharing the
it just
screen,
disappeared.
Federico.
Yeah.
All right, where did you get stuck?
Okay.
Are you sure? I didn't stop sharing the screen.
I think you need to start from what after you read from Isabella can't hear anything because that's when the screen stops.
Just going to upset. And what is this thing? Can anybody see my screen? Because it shows me that I'm still sharing it, so.
No, I can't see it.
Yo
I'm
tampoco puedo
now
ver.
starting to see it.
No.
Yeah.
Ahora sí, ahora
No,
sí.
no,
Yeah.
okay, yes.
Rough now.
I have to share
Right
it
now.
again. What the hell? All right, when was the last part that you guys saw?
When you started the minutes, you had the 3 pages to the far right of the screen, the internal. We saw all that. Yeah. Yeah. Stop right there. That's where you stop.
All right, perfect. So the minute structure, like I mentioned, so anyways, here we go, quickly. The structure of the Vecanter meeting, as you can see, it has like 5 sections, if you want to call it like that, not 5 sections, but 5 points. Like I mentioned, the people who are attending, the participants, it's important to point out. The proposed agenda and items discussed, meaning what is going to be discussed, and make it brief, as in 5 words maximum of what needs to be, what was discussed. And obviously the content has to cover basically every point that on the item of the agenda, and it has to give out the situation, the impact, the steps to be taken, and conclusion. So to narrate what happened in a brief way. It's also important that one thing that I hadn't mentioned before is that the points, the way you organize the points in the minute for the proposed agenda / items discussed should be the same way that you present them within the content of the minute, right? And basically there you have the action where you have to mention most of these points that are discussed. It should reflect what the consequences or the items of the items discussed are, meaning what do they produce? Because they obviously discuss subjects with the idea to produce something. And if there's a situation, the idea is to solve it. If there's something new, the idea is to launch it, right? And obviously the closure, which reflects the agreements and commitments that were made during that meeting. So what are the common mistakes? Like I said, the idea is that you need to show a sharp image of what reality of the discussion was, right? And sometimes because of common mistakes that we make, right, which I'm gonna cover and mention in a bit, you end up projecting something that is not the reality at all. So the idea is that these are the most common mistakes that happen in a meeting, in a minute of a meeting. So you have the lack of clarity. There's a lot of minutes that lack clarity, sorry, because they tend to ramble or they don't, the ideas are not expressed in a concrete manner. People are not properly identified. So it's happened in minutes where somebody might have, the participants might be two of them have the same first name and they have different last name, obviously. And then that is never cleared out throughout the text. So there's meetings where Jorge Parra, who's from the customer service, and Jorge Silva, who's from IT, are in the same meeting. And then sometimes you might read a minute and just talks about Jorge, and Jorge, and you don't know which one you're talking about. You have to figure it out by context and the topic. So the idea is that you should always be able to differentiate them. You could say, I don't know, Jorge P is Jorge Parra and Jorge Silva is Jorge S, and sort of treat it like that within the minute, right? Also, you have to take care of a common mistake that you have to watch out is the addition of side topics, which happens a lot during meetings. During meetings, sometimes you might be talking to somebody or to the whole group that have met there, and you might have a side comment to somebody who's present at the meeting with something that has nothing to do with the meeting itself or what the agenda discussion points were, and those topics get added. That's a problem. Also, the excess of detail or the omission of details also. Excess of details is because some people, like I said, make it like a word by word document, and instead of just summarizing ideas that have been presented. And sometimes omission of details was very frequent too. One example that I gave in the meeting when I did this, but in Spanish, is that somebody wrote Hendrix and Jorge had a discussion on the automated notifications for detention, and it said nothing else. So you don't know what the conclusion was, what happened, what was the situation with the automation of the notices. It said nothing. It just basically said they discussed it. So that is not the idea. The idea is to give more detail and context. And also, one problem that happened a lot was inconsistent language. So if you refer to something, any item, whatever it is, or concept by a particular name, then repeat that name consistently. I saw there were minutes, for example, where people were talking about the merge, and then because maybe they thought they were being repetitive, they would say that they would then switch it, and instead of saying the merge, they would say D&D, and then they would switch it again and then say detention, and then sometimes they wouldn't even say the words. They would say, oh, when the container still remains, the delay that the container generates when it still remains within the port. Now, like if you're gonna call something, if you're gonna say D&D, say D&D throughout the whole thing. If you're gonna call it the merge or you're talking about detention, call it by that name consistently. Because what ends up happening when you don't remain consistent in your language, it creates a lot of confusion, and people think that you're talking about something else every time you change the topic. So just to give you an example of what happens is that meeting that I clicked on that was on the right side is from a Peruvian company that they did a minute, right? And just to give you an example of what not to do, is I took some of their text and translated it so you could see. So for example, one paragraph is basically said, we were created as a company open to the world. We went from being a representing agent to a great corporation that provides solution in the capital goods business with operations in Peru, Central America, and other countries. At the end of 2017, we can show sales of over 1,480 million US that were generated through the daily efforts of over 6,000 employees who were the heirs of the will and dedication of many generations of workers. Wow, that's a lot to take. And that basically says, if you could write it in a minute, in 2 lines, you could perfectly say that this was a company that went from local in Peru to an international country, to an international, company, and that $480 million were generated in revenue, thanks to, if you wanted to add that, thanks to the workers. But everything else is just too prolonged, too exaggerated. It doesn't really get to the point. Same thing with the second paragraph that I picked out, which is, at the same time in 2017, we celebrated the 75 years of relationship with our main customer, Caterpillar. Our relationship with Caterpillar has been and is decisive for our corporation and has allowed us to reproduce healthy commercial practices and overall deepen the concept of customer service. Again, this is too long. All you need to say is that we celebrated in 2017, we celebrated 75 years of representing Caterpillar, from whom we derive our good practices. And that's it. You can shorten things a lot just by, just by going ahead and just summarizing things and keeping your language clean and simple. No. Uh-oh. Sorry, guys. Made a slight mistake here. So I'm trying to move it back. Come on. One method. And Jesus. Sorry, I apologize. My computer just literally got in problems. Pume, do you mind taking over the slides?
Okay, I'm going to share.
Hello, I can't hear anybody.
Sorry,
Anybody
we're
there?
trying to.
Nobody's talking, Maxine.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. And correct. This is the slide that I want to get to. So aspects of a minute, right? The key, let's say, the importance of a good, let's say, the key to a good minute is the preparation before the meeting. Meaning, once you know what the topics are going to be discussed, it helps a lot if not only the person that might take the minute, which is not decided until the moment of the meeting, but doesn't matter, where everybody sort of prepares what the points of discussion are going to be. And so what the points of discussions are going to be. And it's very important that you know already what you're going to bring to the table. If, let's say, you're from the collections department and you see that one of the topics has to do with your department, be prepared, meaning, get your numbers, get your facts straightened out beforehand, because sometimes it happens that you might have a meeting and somebody just shows up, and even though the topic deals with their department directly, they don't have any information on hand, and it actually sort of delays everything, as well as it doesn't give any value or substance to the meeting. Also, you have to be, let's say, in that sense, more proactive and less reactive, meaning you have to sort of make sure that whatever topics have to do with you, you have information at hand. Also, I encourage everybody that if you know that a minute's being called by a country manager, if you have points to discuss yourself with them, add them to the agenda. You can always say that you also want to talk about this or that, or bring it up during the meeting, right? Don't necessarily wait for the country manager of that particular, or whoever calls a meeting of that particular region. Don't let them be the one who necessarily that takes the whole agenda. You can actually bring in conversations or topics to discuss to the table, right? So be prepared, more proactive, less reactive. Know what you wish to gain from the meeting. What is your goal? Especially the person who gives out the meeting or leads the meeting, they need to know what is it that they want out of it. If there's a situation, then how do you think, get a resolution out of it? If you are just launching some new project, make sure that your goal then maybe is to make sure that everybody is on board and online on what it is that we're going to do, and and know how they're going to promote it. For example, itemize the information discussed That's very important also in the meeting, as I will show you later on. It's better to treat things or the topics discussed as let's say like a list or more like a shopping list, where you have points and you go through them and expand them, and don't let it be free text. And therefore, it's also very important not to expand too much, to basically cut to the chase, get to whatever it is that you have to say about what happened, or the person who writes the minute about what happened regarding that particular topic. Just, you know, declare the problem, what the solution is, and what actions are going to be taken, for example. Use an active voice. This is also very important. Sometimes, and it happens a lot in Spanish, where people try to do things in an implicit manner, and therefore it ends up causing more confusion, because the idea is that you summarize and sort of address the point directly, and therefore sometimes the niceties need to be lost a bit. And also, I don't know if you could click on the dartboard, Pume, so they can show examples, they can see examples of what is a passive voice and what is an active voice, you know, especially, you know, that active voice tends to be much shorter than a passive voice. You know, when you write something saying like, a letter has been received by him, you just, you know, you could easily just shorten or be direct and say just he has received the letter, right? In particular, let's say also name names. So if it's you're talking about Riaz, say Riaz has received the letter. Don't try to sort of zazz it up or expand it or try to be too formal. The idea is that you are concrete. Can you click on the image, Pume, so that you can go back to the other slide? So the idea again is to keep the minutes concrete, and also keep, let's say, when I add that point of keep a formal vocabulary, is because in a lot of examples that I saw out there, a lot of, let's say, colloquial language was used. And when colloquial language is used and you basically share it with people from other countries, they might miss the meaning or what the phrase that's been written, what it is about, because the importance about, let's say, a minute is that whoever is the person who reads that minute, they most likely are not going to be there, or whenever they were either not at the meeting, or if they're not, you know, or simply the meeting has all gone by already, and obviously there's not a repeat. So the thing is that you have to ask yourself, how do we ensure that you're communicating the topics discussed appropriately? And the way that you can do that is exactly as taking the other person's perspective. You have to sort of locate yourself in the shoes of somebody else, let's say, and give it a fresh read of your minute before you send it, and sort of see that what is, let's say, that other person would get. So you can have an idea, because sometimes things only make sense when you have been present at the meeting or when you're there. But when somebody reads it further ahead, or somebody who wasn't there reads it, it doesn't really make sense, or they interpret something else. So for the next slide, we're going to basically, the idea is to give you a little bit of a method of how to address, how to improve your meetings and cover your bases. It's more like a mnemotechnic rule. The idea is that it doesn't have to be word by word exact, but obviously the idea is that you sort of, every time you look at your minutes, you know that this is covered there. So it's called the blind method. So the blind method basically is, first is bottom line. Declare every time you get to a point in a meeting, or in a minute of a meeting, the idea is get to the bottom line, make sure that you declare exactly what you want to achieve or what the situation is, right? Then I for impact on organization, meaning what are the changes that will be that are the consequence of this situation that you've stated, or this bottom line of the thing that you want to achieve. And obviously you have to indicate what are the next steps, what are the commitments that you're gonna, that are gonna come out of this meeting or this point of discussion, and then provide details that support the bottom line, facts. So just to say a perfect example or a little example of what happens is, let's say you have a point to discuss the agenda of collections, and the bottom, and you basically have to write in the minute that bottom line is increase pressure on customers. Increase pressure on customers to enhance collections in Guyana. The details you can say that you can throw in, because it doesn't have to be in that order though, but those are the points that need to be covered. So collections has decreased by 50% from January to March, and therefore this is, you know, a decreasing company revenue. Therefore, we're gonna now apply a bond on all customers that have debts that are older than 30 days or amounts higher than $1,000. And this will be done by, this will be launched by next month. And sort of that small compressed idea, sort of obviously just a random example, but it's sort of the idea that you get with the blind method. Whenever you write something, you can just apply this mnemotechnic rule to it and see if it covers all the bases. And so if it does, then you move on to the next. So for the next slide, it's important that you realize that in your minutes, you cover, you know, the basic, I think that in journalism, they teach this, where you have to cover the basic questions, which is who, what, when, where, why, and when. And so, and so make sure that every time you read your minutes, these points are covered. One thing that you can see that I've been repeating throughout the presentation when you write your minutes is that you write them, and then let's say you can write them right away after your meeting or write them a little bit later. But the idea is that you basically do a first draft with everything in it and then start to polish it, right? So take a break from it and get back to it. Let's say a short break from it and then get back to it and make sure that all these points that we're discussing are points that are being covered. So in the next slide, which is basically we're reaching our end of our presentation, we're going to show you, we're going to do a small exercise, and let's see if you guys can sort of apply the general concepts that I've given you here to this video. Pume, if you want to, I have the video. Okay, yeah, indicate keywords and sum up the most important items. But if you want, I have the video already uploaded in my computer, and I can run it if you want.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
So I'll share my screen now. And then now my computer is alive again. And can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, perfect. So it's just a brief 6 minutes, but we'll get to it.
When I was 27 years old, I left a very demanding job in management consulting for a job that was even more demanding, teaching. I went to teach 7th graders math in the New York City public schools. And like any teacher, I made quizzes and tests, I gave out homework assignments. When the work came back, I calculated grades. What struck me was that IQ was not the only difference between my best and my worst students. Some of my strongest performers did not have stratospheric IQ scores. Some of my smartest kids weren't doing so well. And that got me thinking. The kinds of things you need to learn in 7th grade math, sure, they're hard. Ratios, decimals, the area of a parallelogram. But these concepts are not impossible. And I was firmly convinced that every one of my students could learn the material if they worked hard and long enough. After several more years of teaching, I came to the conclusion that what we need in education is a much better understanding of students and learning from a motivational perspective, from a psychological perspective. In education, the one thing we know how to measure best is IQ. But what if doing well in school and in life depends on much more than your ability to learn quickly and easily. So I left the classroom and I went to graduate school to become a psychologist. I started studying kids and adults in all kinds of super challenging settings. And in every study, my question was, who is successful here and why? My research team and I went to West Point Military Academy. We tried to predict which cadets would stay in military training and which would drop out. We went to the National Spelling Bee and tried to predict which children would advance farthest in competition. We studied rookie teachers working in really tough neighborhoods, asking which teachers are still going to be here in teaching by the end of the school year. And of those, who will be the most effective at improving learning outcomes for their students? We partnered with private companies asking which of these salespeople is going to keep their jobs and who's going to earn the most money. In all those very different contexts, one characteristic emerged as a significant predictor of success. And it wasn't social intelligence, it wasn't good looks, physical health, and it wasn't IQ. It was grit. Grit is passion and perseverance for very long-term goals. Grit is having stamina. Grit is sticking with your future, day in, day out, not just for the week, not just for the month, but for years, and working really hard to make that future a reality. Grit is living life like it's a marathon, not a sprint. A few years ago, I started studying grit in the Chicago public schools. I asked thousands of high school juniors to take grit questionnaires, and then waited around more than a year to see who would graduate. Turns out that grittier kids were significantly more likely to graduate, even when I matched them on every characteristic I could measure, things like family income, standardized achievement test scores, even how safe kids felt when they were at school. So it's not just at West Point or the National Spelling Bee that grit matters, it's also in school, especially for kids at risk for dropping out. To me, the most shocking thing about grit is how little we know, how little science knows about building it. Every day, parents and teachers ask me, how do I build grit in kids? What do I do to teach kids a solid work ethic? How do I keep them motivated for the long run? The honest answer is, I don't know. What I do know is that talent doesn't make you gritty. Our data show very clearly that there are many talented individuals who simply do not follow through on their commitments. In fact, in our data, grit is usually unrelated or even inversely related to measures of talent. So far, the best idea I've heard about building grit in kids is something called growth mindset. This is an idea developed at Stanford University by Carol Dweck, and it is the belief that the ability to learn is not fixed, that it can change with your effort. Dr. Dweck has shown that when kids read and learn about the brain and how it changes and grows in response to challenge, they're much more likely to persevere when they fail because they don't believe that failure is a permanent condition. So growth mindset is a great idea for building grit, but we need more. And that's where I'm going to end my remarks, because that's where we are. That's the work that stands before us. We need to take our best ideas, our strongest intuitions, and we need to test them. We need to measure whether we've been successful, and we have to be willing to fail, to be wrong, to start over again with lessons learned. In other words, we need to be gritty about getting our kids grittier. Thank you.
All right, everyone. So what do you think are the main points discussed, or what are the key words that she discussed about there? She spoke about there.
Oh, grit.
Grit. What's the main idea behind grit?
That is more important than actually being able to learn quickly. It's more important to long-term success.
Correct. Anyone else? Any other points?
What makes someone successful?
Uh-huh. What other points does she make? She mentioned something very key, but she mentioned it like the concept very quickly. Just summarized it, I think, in 2 words, and she mentioned it 2 or 3 times. No, growth mindset. That's what she discussed. But anyways, so that's sort of, as we can see, that those are the main points basically she discussed. She discussed that to be successful, you don't necessarily, it doesn't depend on your IQ or on your skills. It depends a lot on your grit, which is defined as the persistence, basically through adversity or through failure, because you understand that failure is not a permanent state. It's just something you just go through, right? And that what helps is something called growth mindset. So basically that sort of sums up that idea. Anyways, thank you guys for showing up today. And if you have any questions regarding the presentation, don't hesitate to reach out to me via email. If there's anything that you think we should improve, let us know. I don't know if Pumeya, do we have like a survey at the end, or we're not going to have a survey at the end?
No, thanks, Federico. I'm going to send a survey later, maybe tomorrow or in a few minutes. I think in a few minutes. So you can answer, please. Thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you so
Wait,
much. We
Federico,
really appreciate it.
I have a question, Premier Federico. Would you all be sending out the format, or at least the aspect of the format you'll want these minutes in? I know it was discussed in the presentation, but instead of sending us the presentation, the entire presentation, can you all send that to us, please?
Yes, we will send an example. I have a question for you. So this is an example. Let's see if I can share it. Yeah, anyways, here's the screen. If you can see it, this is in Spanish, but is this the format that you guys are filling out for your minutes?
For
Yes.
internal minutes, yes. Not
Okay.
for external minutes.
When you mean external minutes, you mean what? Meetings with customers?
Yeah?
Okay.
Is that
Gotcha.
the format that we should use for external minutes?
I would say, well, for external minutes, I would say that this could be, it is recommended that you also can use this format. You might have to adjust it a bit, but anyways, but yes, ideally what they want to do is that all minutes sort of comply with this format. Obviously, external minutes tend to be on email, if my memory serves me right. But just to give you a summons, obviously this is in Spanish, but no worries. You can see in the first table here, it talks about participants. I'm just mentioning the people present. Then you break it down to the agenda, which are like, in this case, I looked for a short one, which only had 2 points. You can see that the ideas are quite short, even though the second one has a little bit of extra wordage there. But, and then you see, this is the content, where you see that in order we had it up in the agenda is the same thing we have down here. And we have revision, basically the topic, and what was discussed with people names in it and what was going on. And you also broke it down at the end with a little bit of action, meaning what is the action point that comes out of this discussion of that particular topic. And then at the end, you have the agreements that were made, who's responsible for them, and whether or not they have let's say a deadline to be delivered. So hopefully, I believe that there should be an English format of it already. If not, either way, I'll get to work on it and just send you an example of what a meeting looks like and how it should be summarized.
Okay, thank you.
Perfect. Anyone else? Well, thank you so much, everyone. Hope this is useful for you. Again, your feedback is very appreciated, if anything, and apologize for any mistakes that might have occurred during the presentation.
Thanks, Federico.
Thanks, Federico.
Thank you,
Thank
guys.
you.
Yeah, have a good day.
Okay, bye, everybody.